Hi, it's Adam here. Are you looking for a new way to achieve a cinematic look in your still photography? I might just have a great suggestion for you here with Cinestill 50D. This still camera film, which you can get processed in C41 chemistry, has really impressed me. Now, if you're looking for some high-res scans to have a look at, head on over to my blog. I'll put a link in the description. You can go ahead and download a zip file with a whole load of TIFFs straight out of a scanner without any post-processing, so you can play around with adjusting the exposure on it and color correcting it, seeing the amount of detail that's available in the shadows and the highlights. If that's what you want to do, jump over to my blog, download the zip file and play around with the TIFF files. But let's go into a little bit more detail about this film, and I'll tell you what I really am impressed about with it. So Cinestill 50, so it's a 50 ISO color film, and the D stands for daylight balanced. So it's white balanced for outside in daylight. It's got a really nice Hollywood summer movie look to it. And that's actually quite important to think about, because Cinestill 50D is actually Kodak 5203 or 7203 color motion picture negative film. So that's actually used quite commonly, or up until digital really took over in the motion picture industry in Hollywood. That particular Kodak color stock was generally used in Hollywood for a lot of the nice summer comedies and shots that were taken outside where there was brilliant light. So a lot of the images that you might end up getting out of Cinestill 50D could look remarkably familiar as far as color and just light and shadows and highlights go. Cinestill is buying Kodak's color motion picture film, and they're putting it through a chemical process to remove the rem-jet layer. To explain what that is, when film moves through a motion picture camera, it's generally moving through at 24 frames a second, sometimes 48 or up to 60 or even 120 frames per second. And the rem-jet layer is there to prevent scratches and allow the film to move through the camera at a very high speed. It also prevents a halo look around light. So if the film crew had to bring in some additional lights, or if there was a bright white building that might glow a lot in the shot, the rem-jet layer, also known as a anti-halation layer, prevents a unwanted glow effect. But in order for us as consumers to be able to get this film developed in C41 chemistry, Cinestill has to run the film through a chemical process to remove the rem-jet layer. Otherwise we have to use a completely different way of processing the film, which is just not available off the street. The result of that is we get a film that we can use and get processed at our local chemist or photo supplier. But because the anti-halogen layer has been removed, sometimes things like light bulbs or bright areas in your shot might have a red halo look to them. Me personally, I kind of like it if I know that it's going to be there. It's got a sort of a 1970s movie vibe to it. And I think this is a really important point to make. Cinestill, like all films for me, once I have shot a couple of rolls and I get a feel for how the film is going to behave in certain conditions, then I can sort of start to imagine what my photos are going to look like as I'm taking them, because I'm thinking about how the film is working under the circumstances that I'm putting it through. And when you get more into film photography, that's something really that you should start to be doing, because it's like you might choose, say, a really highly saturated film like Fuji Velvia, and you know the sort of colours that it's going to end up giving you, and so you start working with that when you're composing your photos. But anyway, let's get back onto Cinestill 50D. Me personally, I really like shooting at wide open apertures for shallow depth of field. I love shooting in bad light situations as well, or just working with the available light, and I love scenes where there's a lot of shadows and some highlights that I can work with. Hence, I tend to use a lot of lenses wide open at f2 or f1.4, and so a film with a really low ISO is actually quite useful for me there, because I also like to do some long exposure speeds to get a bit of a motion blur look in my photos as well. Obviously, the other great thing about 50 ISO film is that it is so incredibly well detailed. 50 ISO, yeah, the detail in this film is just phenomenal, and when you download and try out the scans, I'm sure you'll agree there's just so much detail there. The film isn't necessarily a very sharp film, because remember, sharpness and detail are two very, very different things when it comes to photography. A lot of consumer films back in the 80s and the 90s, and also modern day smartphones, tend to sharpen images quite a lot and have quite a lot of contrast in them. They look really sharp when you first look at them, but then when you look closely, there's just no detail. And Cinestill 50D captures all of the detail, and if you want to introduce a bit of digital sharpness in your post-processing, it responds really well to that. But this is a really nice, highly detailed film. The other point I should make about Cinestill 50D is when you first scan it, or if you just get prints done at your local lab or chemist, they're going to look quite desaturated, very flat. Now, for motion picture film, that's actually a really good thing, because a really flat image where the shadows are open, the highlights aren't peaking, and there's a lot of information in the midtones, that allows the director of a movie to work with the editor and the colorist to change the colors to really whatever they want in order to achieve their vision. So it's actually a really, their vision for the movie. So it's actually a really forgiving film in that regard. If you under or overexpose the film quite a lot, it actually is still going to give you a result that you can work with in Lightroom or Photoshop and bring your photos back to really a well-exposed image quite easily. So it's really forgiving, and I quite like that in my film, because I make a lot of mistakes when I'm shooting film. But the really nice flat and like almost desaturated look that you get straight out of the film is great, because you can work with the color a lot and you can change it up. You can bring in more saturation if that's what you want to do. You can isolate certain colors and only work with them, because this film is so well detailed. Separating your colors in post to work on just specific colors or parts of the image is actually really easy. Again, that's all things that from a technical perspective, cinematographers are looking for in motion picture film when they're shooting film for Hollywood. And so yeah, it's really great in that regard. And you can also convert it to black and white, and you can get a really nice result out of the black and white film as well. You may also just fall in love with the wide open shadows and the non-peaking highlights and just the lovely midtones in the color shots that you can get out of this film, and you might just want to print it straight away. Me personally, that's kind of exactly what I did. I actually really love printing my photos. I think that prints is the best way to look at your photos, not necessarily just on a screen. Now, onto that daylight balancing aspect of the film. Being daylight balanced, it's really suitable for just taking out for a day in the sun. But if you want to do some street photography at dawn or in the evening, being daylight balanced at about 5000K, it's going to really emphasize the evening tones in your image, and that can be a really nice thing. So it can bring in a really nice golden look to your images at those times of day as well, which I really, really love. But really, if you love working with natural and available light for a window kind of a thing, this really is a wonderful film to choose. And I think once you get used to how the red halo effect looks in this film, you may want to actually start working with that to add value to your photos as well. Being really fine-grained, this beautiful high-detailed film is perfect for super big enlargements. And to be honest, I think this film actually really does hold up quite well against some of the best digital sensors that are available in Nikon, Sony, Canon, Leicas in 2021, 2022. So to wrap this up, do I intend to shoot a lot more Cinestill 50D? Absolutely. It was a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot of room for some great artistic expression in these images. Technically, it's a really easy film to work with once you get around it. It is available in 35mm and 120. There's some brilliant work by some very, very talented photographers out there who are using this film for some landscape work as well, particularly on 120, and those photos look absolutely gorgeous, so well detailed, and are just knocking most of the high-end digital body cameras out of the park as far as image quality and detail goes. Compared to something like Kodak Portra 160, which I also shoot quite a lot of, it's pretty much on a par as far as detail and colour tone goes, I reckon. But the lower ISO for me personally is a plus, because I just like to have a lower ISO available. But there may be times when I want to try and avoid the red halo effect around lights in my photos, so then I would actually have to reach back to a roll of Kodak Portra 160. I think that Cinestill 50D, Kodak Portra 160 are going to be films which I'm going to keep in my camera bag and just reach for either one for quite a lot of photos going forward. Price-wise, this film isn't cheap. You can actually get Kodak Portra at a cheaper price than this film. Cinestill 50D is not a cheap film, but it really is worth it. And let's face it, film prices are just going up and up and up, and I think film photographers are just getting used to film becoming expensive now anyway. So I'm actually filming, editing, and hoping to upload this video on 31st of January 2021. Wishing everyone a very happy new year and all the very best for your photography. Please head on over to my blog, check out some of the photos that I've taken with this film, and read up on some more of my thoughts. But all the best, guys.